Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Knack TV. I'm your host, Neil Malek. I'm a software and professional development teacher with about 10 years of experience, and I started recording video last week with two goals. My short-term goal is that with every video, you become a little better at what you do, and my long-term goal is I want you to be incredible at what you do. This is week number 2, a week I'm calling How to Do Calculations in Excel. This is episode number 5, an episode I'm calling Formulas. Let's start out with the basics here. In Microsoft Excel, there are two basic ways of looking at things. You can go into these different cells in an Excel spreadsheet and you can type stuff into those cells. And oftentimes that's exactly what you want to do. You want to be able to type somebody's name in, or you want to be able to type in how much you sold last week, or things of that nature. But then there are other times where you want to be able to find out a value that you don't have to hand type yourself. For instance, if you have all of the different sales that you have in a given quarter, you'd like to be able to calculate up how much you sold over the whole lifespan of the quarter, and you don't want to have to do that math by hand. So you're going to want to have some sort of calculation, and there are two basic ways to do calculations inside of Microsoft Excel. Those two basic fundamental ways are formulas and functions. Now, a formula is different from a function in that formulas are things that you type up by hand. So, for example, if I said it's time for me to add 1 plus 2 plus 3, and I just, I went ahead and wrote down 1 and then the plus sign, and then 2, then a plus sign, then 3, that would be a formula. Now, on the other hand, if I said, I'm pretty sure that everybody understands what I mean when I say that I want to sum this up, you might take something called a function, specifically in this case a sum function. You might say take the sum function and just toss 1, 2, and 3 into there. And so the functions are these pre-written things, these things that already have names that Microsoft Excel gives you, whereas formulas are things that you write out by hand. So we'll start off with some fundamentals here. When we go to Microsoft Excel and we have a set of numbers, let's say like the set of numbers here in the A column. In the A column, I've got cell A2, I've got the number 5. In cell A3, I've got the number 7. And in cell A4, I've got the number 4. So I go to those cells and I say to myself, I'd really love to be able to calculate the sum total, all of the values that are in these 3 different cells. So what we do is we start off by going into the cell underneath those. Now you can put this anywhere you want, but I'm going to go right below those. And I'm going to say to myself, okay, if I want to make sure that Microsoft Excel knows that I want to create a calculation, rather than just taking whatever I type and showing it on the screen, I need to find some way of showing Excel that it's actually different. So in Microsoft Excel, when you say, I want this to be a calculation instead of just a number that I type in or a word that I type in, I always start off that calculation with the equal sign. So we start off, we hit the equal sign, and now it's time for us to calculate the values that are in here. Now, we could just type in the number value that's in cell A2, the number value that's in cell A3, and the number value that's in cell A4, and that would actually run a proper calculation. See right here, if I go ahead and hit enter, it actually does calculate what the sum total is. But there's a problem here, and that is, if I go to cell A2 and I change the value that's in cell A2 to 25, well, I'm no longer getting a calculation of those 3 numbers added together, because I'm not actually referring to cell A2, I'm just putting the same number on the screen as what's in cell A2. So instead of actually hand typing the numbers that go into the different pieces of the calculation, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to refer to those cells. And it's actually very, very easy to do. What Microsoft allows you to do is type in the reference to the cell that you want. So if, for example, I know that it's cell A2 and cell A3 and cell A4 that I'm trying to add together, I just actually type out A2 plus A3 plus A4. And there you can see, that's a proper calculation. And in fact, when I go to cell A4 and I change cell A4 to a 0, you can see that my calculation actually changes as opposed to just being, hard-coded with those numbers. And that's it. So it's a very, very simple thing to do in Microsoft Excel to get Excel to calculate things for you. You always start off with an equal sign, and then you use the addition sign, the subtraction, the multiplication, the division that you learned how to do in grade school. And what you do is you don't actually put numbers in there, but instead you put in little pointers that say go to cell A2, go to cell A3, go to cell A4. So let's see another example of this in action. If I go to cell B5, right next to the cell that I was just working on, I might want to, again, do a simple calculation of B2 plus B3 plus B4. Now if you notice, after I type in the equal sign, not only can I type, I can also go ahead and use my mouse. So after I type in the equal sign in cell B5, if I simply click on cell B2, it also adds that same reference as it did earlier when I typed it in. So if you want, you could do an equal sign and then click on B2 and then type in the plus sign, and then click on cell B3 and then put in the plus sign, and then click on cell B4 and then hit enter. And there you go, there's another way of doing the exact same calculation. And if you notice, what's really cool about this is when you go into that function, in that formula there you see that each of the different references is a different color. And in addition to that, the thing that it's referring to has a box around it that has the exact same color on it. It's really nice. Alright, so let's keep on going along this thread here. Let's imagine another situation where you're not just adding values together, but where you're doing something a little more complicated. So let's say that you wanted to do some multiplication or some division. Now, if you haven't done a lot of multiplication and division since grade school, you're probably thinking about the multiplication sign that looks like a little X and the division sign that looks like a dash with a dot above it and a dot below it. Well, in Microsoft Excel, we don't have those little symbols anymore. So instead what we do is we have the normal plus sign, we have the normal minus sign. When we want to multiply things together, we use the asterisk, and when we want to divide things, we use a slash. So, for example, if I wanted to calculate that I wanted to take the first value, multiply it by the second value, and then multiply it by the third value, I would use asterisks for that. If you notice, over in column C, if I take a dollar amount for a particular item, and I take the number of that item that I want to buy, and then I take the sales tax, I can calculate how much sales tax I need to pay for a purchase of 15 items. Simply by doing the equal sign, then 3 references to the 3 different cells, each with an asterisk between them, instead of the plus sign. Okay, now it seems pretty simple so far. All we do to calculate something in Microsoft Excel is we put in our equal sign, and then we put in our different symbols between the different references to those various different cells. But there's a little bit more to it than just that. So let's look back at the screen one more time, and let's imagine ourselves in a situation where we have to add 2 things together, and then we have to multiply. Now the tough part is that if we want to add 2 things together and then we want to multiply, how does Excel know that we want to add the things together first instead of multiplying them together first? Well, let's take an example here. Let's say that I type out 5 plus 5 times 3 plus 3. Now you may say to yourself, I want to calculate 5 plus 5 and 3 plus 3 first, to give me 10 and 6, and then I want to multiply those to give me 60. But actually the interesting thing, if you remember from grade school, there was this thing called PEMDAS, or you might have remember please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And what this means is that addition and subtraction, the Aunt Sally part of this, always comes at the end, and multiplication and division, the my dear part of the sentence, always comes before that. So, when I actually write out 5 plus 5 times 3 plus 3, what Excel sees is multiplication first. It sees 5 times 3, gives me 15. Then it tries to add 15 to the 5 and the 3, and I get 23 instead of 60. So if I were going to try to do a calculation like that, I'd need to use my please excuse my dear Aunt Sally thing in order to make this really work. So what is the please part of please excuse my dear Aunt Sally? If you guys don't remember this from back in school, the please part of please excuse my dear Aunt Sally is parentheses. So in my situation right here, when I want to take two different things and add them together first and then multiply them by the sales tax, what I've got to do is I've got to put in my equal sign, and I take my first value plus my second value times my third value. But if I want to do the addition first, I have to put parentheses before and after the addition. Now with the parentheses there, the parentheses, whatever's in the parentheses gets done first, and so the addition of the first two items gets done first, and then finally the multiplication gets done after. Kind of cool. Maybe you didn't want to think about all that stuff that you left behind in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, but you know, you have to do it every once in a while. Every once in a while, these things crop back up. And really, addition and subtraction is not that big a deal. Multiplication and division is not that big a deal. And it's a beautiful thing that Excel does it for you automatically. But what you just have to remember is that Excel plays by the same rules that they told you about in 5th or 6th grade. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Before we sign off and head over to the next episode, what I'd like to sort of throw out at you is another complementary idea. And that is, let's move over to the next sheet here. So we're on our next sheet of the spreadsheet, and we realize that there are a bunch of columns here that all need to be added together. And we think to ourselves, there's got to be some way of duplicating this effort as many times as I want it to, and not sort of put this all on me. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into the first cell, and we're going to enter our calculation, equal sign, and then put in references to cells B4, B5, B6, and B7. Okay, so we add those references, we add it all up, and we hit enter, and we think to ourselves, fantastic, we've done a calculation, but now the problem is, how do we get that calculation to repeat for the C column, the D column, the E column, etc.? All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the cell, and we're going to put our mouse over the cell. Now, what I'd like you guys to focus on is what my cursor is going to look like in different spots. And try this out on your own machine, too. When you put your mouse directly over a cell, what you'll notice is that it looks like it's got a big white blocky plus sign. Now, that big white blocky plus sign always means that you can select that cell. So you can click on that cell, and it is now selected. Now, if I put my mouse in a slightly different spot, you see that it gives me a four-headed arrow. Now, the reason it shows me the four-headed arrow is because I'm around the outside edge of the selected cell. If I put my mouse anywhere around that outside edge, I get a four-headed arrow, and what that means is that now if I click and drag, that I can actually move the contents of that cell to another location. So there is a third type of cursor, and this is the one that does the autofill for you. The only way this works is if you put your mouse in the very bottom right-hand corner of the cell, hover over that bottom right-hand corner, and if you notice, it turns into a black plus sign. So previously we had big white blocky plus sign, we had four-headed arrow, and now we have little black plus sign. The little black plus sign is what we call the autofill selector. And now, by putting the mouse in exactly the spot, clicking and dragging to the right, notice right here, bam, it's just like magic, right? You automatically have the same calculation in cell after cell after cell. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Oh, God. That saves you so much time and effort. And the wonderful thing is, here's the last bit of the magic trick for you. Autofill doesn't just work with your functions and formulas. Autofill works with a ton of different things. Let me show you. If you go over and you try to autofill with number 1, it'll autofill that number 1 over and over and over again. Or if you autofill with a date, it can autofill dates down. If you autofill with a month of the year, it can autofill all the months of the year, all the days of the week, for example. And so there are a lot of things that you might do in Microsoft Excel that are repetitious, right? You look at this and you think to yourself, well, all I'm really doing is taking this exact same thing and just repeating it over and over and over again in cell after cell after cell. So here's the trick. You always put your mouse in the bottom right-hand corner of the cell that you're selected on that has the initial thing in it, and then you drag down, and as you drag down, it autofills all the rest all the way down, or if you drag across to the right, it autofills all the way across to the right as well. That's a beautiful thing right there. Thanks so much for episode number 5, and remember, I want you to be incredible at what you do.